Hi, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for having me here. Also, thank you to everyone who is still here. I know it's late. I know you're tired. It's been a long week. So if you get bored, I have some cats. You can maybe find some joy in that. I'm going to share with you some of the work I've been doing as a postdoc in Cambridge about the ionizing properties of galaxies using NIRCam. So I like to think about this as a three-part work. So I started looking at Lyman alpha emitters first with MUSE and GEMS. So we only had 30. Then I went for emission line galaxies on NIRCam, which I saw some of the plots pop up earlier. And then we got about 700 galaxies. And now I'm very happy to say that in about a month on arXiv, you're going to see my new paper with a stellar mass complete sample of about 16,000 galaxies with NIRCam. So we'll see what happens with the ionizing properties. So as I said, as I promised, this is not moving. I promise I'm better at science than I am at computers. So I'm sharing the desktop, is that okay? I don't really know what's happening. I'm so sorry. Oh, but I have extra slides. Yeah, hopefully not, because I added a couple of slides, but so sorry. I might just need to use yours because sharing the desktop, which usually works. Yeah, I think it's just slow, maybe. Yeah. Okay, as I promised, cat. So I don't have to tell you why this is interesting, but basically after the Big Bang, as the universe expanded and cooled down, we got our first stars and galaxies that started ionizing the IGM around them. And as they ionized bubbles around them and these overlapped, we eventually got the universe that we have today, full of light. So I started studying Lyman alpha emitters and emission line galaxies because, as other people said earlier, these are the main culprits responsible for ionization. At least that is the current belief. So they were really cool to go after. Just very slow. Yeah. So if you're used to spectra, I'll just go briefly over how we get emission lines with photometry. So there's two main lines that I've been using to study ξion, which is the production rate of Lyman continuum photons over the UV continuum luminosity. This is called ionizing photon production efficiency. So what is important to know is that both of these methods suffer a bit from some assumptions. So you have to assume a dust attenuation curve. You also have to assume in the case of H alpha that there is K-sp recombination, which is not always applicable. And also you have to assume that if you're looking at H alpha, for example, it's not contaminated by any close by lines like nitrogen 2. It's going, I promise. So this is a plot from my emission line galaxy paper, just showing different SEDs. And we were looking particularly at the 4 bands of the right. So it's 2 filter pairs, medium and wide. And as redshift increases, either H alpha or OIII fall into those lines. And the way that we measure it is that as H alpha gets redshifted or OIII, it will fall in a different band. And you see an excess here. This orange square is fake photometry on the different filters. and you assume that is your emission line flux. So as you can see, there's a lot of steps to get there before we get ξion, and it's good to keep them in mind. So the plot that is going to pop up at some point this one. I think this was shown earlier. So in this paper, I didn't entirely trust SED fitting yet because I had never done it before. I know there's a lot of assumptions that go into it. So what I did was I used H alpha and O3 to measure ξion. So all the orange points are H alpha, or the red points are O3. But then at the same time, I also used Prospector, which is an SED fitting code, fully Bayesian, assumed the non-parametric star formation history. And here we see the residuals between all of them. They all kind of match. That's a good takeaway. And we find that ξion increases with redshift. So the earlier you go into the universe, galaxies seem to be better at ionizing, producing ionizing photons. And we went, moreover, to study what is driving this behavior of ξion increasing with redshift. So what I did was I compared all the properties that I get out of Prospector. I tried to see which was the one that correlated the better with ξion. And we find that it's the burstiness of the star formation history as given by this ratio here. It's the star formation rate in the past 10 megayears over the one in the past 100 megayears. And you see a beautiful color gradient coming here. This is ξion from highest to lowest. And that also goes with the stellar mass. So basically we find that the fainter galaxies with low mass are more efficient in producing ionizing radiation. And then we went further and did some calculations that apparently led to a crisis, but bear with me, there's no crisis. So in one step further, what I'm working on now is, as I teased in the beginning, a stellar mass complete sample with JADES. So I did a very simple cut. I selected everything that has a signal to noise above 3 in the F444W band in JADES, in good south, and that has a redshift, photometric redshift between 3 and 9. That led to about 35,000 galaxies. 1,600 of them have spectroscopic redshifts as well. Thank you to David for making that compilation. Out of those 35 galaxies that I fit, 26,000 had a reduced chi-square less than 1, which my gold sample that I'm working with. And then I did the calculation to see where are we stellar mass complete to the 90%, which again, thank you, David, again for helping me do that. And we find that our stellar masses are complete down to about 7.5 in solar masses in log. So in all the future slides I'm going to show you, I'm just using the galaxies that have a mass above that, above those lines over there, where we are stellar mass complete. So now you're going to see the same plot pop up again. All the colored dots are from literature. So the stars, the orange stars are my Lyman alpha emitters, the blue are the emission line galaxies. Then we have a bunch of compilations from literature. But now you see these triangles on the bottom. That's a new sample. So you can see that there's a bunch of galaxies that we previously missed, because if you select by emission line galaxies, you are missing galaxies that don't have either strong star formation or have obvious emission lines. If we now color code it again by burstiness, which I found in the previous paper was the beta correlation with ξion, we see again a beautiful color gradient as before. Now the points that have edges are the ones that have spectroscopic redshift, and the ones without edges are just photometric. And if I fit a best fit line to the spectroscopic sample, we get this blue line, which actually has a slope of 0.05, which is very consistent to what we found before. And we do believe that's just because the spectroscopic sample has a very similar bias towards emission line galaxies. However, if we look at the stellar mass complete sample, it's the black line up there, and the slope is basically 0. There is no evolution. It's quite flat with redshift, which is going to solve a lot of problems. So this is from the previous paper. We found that ξion, as many people had found in literature before, ξion increased for fainter galaxies. And we saw this per every redshift bin. There was a positive evolution where fainter galaxies were more efficient in producing ionizing radiation. Now, can you guess how it's going to look with the new sample? You might have to guess if it doesn't pop up. It's flat. However, not only is it flat per redshift bin, but we also find a secondary population. This is the bonus of the work. So if I divide the sample between the ones that have star formation rate 10 over 100, less than -1, so they have no recent star formation, basically, we get these galaxies in the bottom that also have a flat evolution with MUV, but are quite lower in ξion. So we looked at this a bit further, and this is work in progress because unfortunately, none of these have spectra in NIRCam, so I only have photometry for them. But I found that they populate a very similar space than what Harley Katz proposed in Sphinx galaxies, which is basically a space of remnant leaker candidates. So these are galaxies that are leaking Lyman continuum radiation, but have no recent star formation. What happened is that they have a very big burst of star formation in the past, 20, 30, 50 mega years. And it was so disruptive to the ISM that everything is basically leaking, just like an ionization bounded H2 region. And if I look at the star formation histories that you're seeing there, it's just a stack of all of them. We do see that there's no recent star formation, but there is a big burst around between 10 and 40 mega years in the past. So it looks really cool. And moreover, if I use a beta slope, which I know Duncan just talked about, but if you trust it, we find that like 60% of these galaxies seem to be leaking. So that's great. And we need spectra, and this is where my ELT slide comes up. If we use mosaic and METIS, we can get both the region where we have maybe H alpha and O3, because I do have the photometry for these galaxies, and it seems that they either don't have emission lines or have very weak ones. So it'd be really good to look at them. And with mosaic, we could get better beta slopes and do a better analysis in that way. So that's my insert. So I'm going to my final slides. If you read my previous paper, you saw that we did something like this. We basically estimate the cosmic ionizing photon budget per redshift and per volume of the universe. And that is just combining an escape fraction, pick your favorite, ξion, pick your favorite, hopefully it's mine, and a luminosity density function, which I use some from Richard Bowen's. And you can get these curves that show you per redshift and per luminosity bin, how your luminosity functions look. If you integrate them, you get to the money plot that caused so many problems in the past months. So in the previous paper, this hatched region is where my points lied, because they were emission line galaxies, and then the faint galaxies were so efficient that if you assume them and you fold them in with the luminosity functions, you got a big upturn here in ionizing photons at high redshifts. Whereas if you use a stellar mass complete sample, it's now the triangles that are just following the expected regions. There's no crisis, everything's okay. And my final slide is that if we now look, we take these three curves, these are from the McDowell models, so they tell you how much ionizing photons you need to maintain hydrogen ionization in the universe. Clumping factor of 1 is uniform IgM, and as you go up in clumping, you need more ionizing photons in order to ionize the universe. So if you look at the first one, clumping 1, I will assume that is 100% and then estimate how much of the triangles are to that 100%. And moreover, I separated each triangle in 3 MUV bins to see which kinds of galaxies are dominating reionization. And we have it here, again. So the top row is the clumping of 1. I don't want you to get lost in this plot because it's not that important, but the 3 columns are escape fractions, 10%, 20, and then a variable one that I took from literature. What is important here is that these purple lines, the purple bars in each redshift bin, are the faintest galaxies. And in all of the panels, the biggest one is always the faintest galaxies. They are always contributing the majority of the ionizing photons. So I would say that the big takeaways of this work is that all the relations are flatter than we used to think, but galaxies are enough to ionize the universe. They do produce ionizing photons without creating a crisis, which is great, but faint low mass galaxies are still the culprits and dominant reionization. And thank you very much.
Really nice work, Charlotte. It's great that you've removed one of the reasons to panic. My one question was, so if these are sources with the medium bands that you don't detect strong emission lines, and you don't have spectroscopic redshifts for these, how confident are you on the photometric redshifts?
The only check I can do is against ones that already have spectroscopic redshifts. So I don't know if the comparison is apples to apples, but I find an outlier fraction of about 3% when I compared like the photometric ones with Prospector to the spectroscopic. So I think it might be okay, especially at redshift 5 and 6, where JWST, like you get that good UV coverage. I think those are quite confident, but we'll see.
Sorry, just to follow up very quickly, but is it the photometric redshifts derived just from sort of SED fitting easy, or do you also do like a color cut or something?
No, the redshifts are first from easy. So they've been used in NIRCam before and JADES, and they work pretty well. And I use those as priors in my Prospector fit. So I get a bit of constrained redshift, but similar to the redshift, the easy one.
Okay, I think we have to move on because we have to leave the building at 6:30. So let's thank Charlotte again. Thank you. No, that's fine. Can you stop sharing?
Yes.
And the next speaker is James, and the last speaker of the session is James Lepsley, and he's going to talk about molecular hydrogen as a tracer of AGN feedback in radio-loud galaxies, the case of 3C326N, if it works. I think you have to stop sharing, yeah.